Hi everyone, it's the 2025 Paper 1 preview for GCSE Business. In this video, I'm going to give you a bit of an idea of everything you need to know about Paper 1 and what to expect. So in this video, we're going to go through basics from the exam, like what to expect in terms of structure. We're going to look at the different essay questions and calculations that have come up in the previous 5 years. We're going to go through some key terminology, exam technique, how to deal with the case studies, and then some final tips with some most common mistakes that I've seen from students over the years. So which questions appear on the GCSE Business course? We're going to go through a bit of an introduction here. So you've got three sections, A, B and C. Section A is worth 35 marks, Section B is worth 30 marks, Section C is worth 25 marks. But the key thing here is that Section A is mostly short answer questions. So 29 of the marks are short answer question marks. Now, first things first, in terms of timing, you probably want to spend about 35 minutes on each of these sections. Now, the short answer questions are the 1, 2 and 3 markers. Most of these are, as you can see, most of these are in Section A. The long answer questions, so LAQs, are the 6, 9 and 12 markers. So as you can see, Section A is pretty much entirely short answer questions except for 1 6 marker at the end. Section B has 3 essays. It's got a 9 marker and 2 6 markers. And Section C is pretty much all long answer questions. There's 1 9 marker and 1 12 marker. So the key thing here is that I've given, even though I know the marks are set out a bit differently, so it's 35 marks, 30 marks, 25 marks, so there's more marks available in Section A, I still think your timing should be about even for all 3 sections, just because, quite frankly, it's going to take you longer to do the essay questions than it is to do the short answer questions. The short answer questions, like 2-mark multiple choice questions, not going to take you 2 minutes, or it shouldn't anyway. It should take you maybe 15, 20 seconds to read it and think about the answer and put those in. So you can save time in Section A. It also is really important to maximize your marks in Section A, but I'm going to talk a bit more about that towards the end when we do the kind of like key tips and final tips. Right, what do these questions look like? I'm just going to take myself out of the corner for a second so we can see the full table. In Section A, you've got some multiple choice questions. You've got some select 2 questions, which are basically multiple choice questions, but with more than one potential answer. Make sure you read those carefully. The last thing you want to do is miss out on 1 mark just because you've misread a question that's a multiple choice question. You've got some calculation questions, 1 6 mark as we discussed, and you've got 6 of those 3 mark explain questions. So they're really, really important. That's worth there or thereabouts half of Section A, those 3 markers. Section B has some 2 mark outline questions, which is really important to use the case study for. Some 6 mark analyze questions, there's 2 of them. Some calculations again, maybe some stake questions, and a 9 marker, justifying which option. We're going to talk about the structure for all of these different types of questions later on. Section C has 2 1 markers, 1 2 marker, and then the 9 and 12 markers. So let's have a look at the past exam questions for the last 5 years. We're looking at the 12 markers, 9 markers, and 6 markers here. To be honest, you know, there's so many questions on this paper because there's so many 1 and 2 markers and 3 markers that pretty much every topic's come up at different points. So what I've done is instead I've just focused on what essays have come up. So 12, 9 and 6 markers. I'm not going to read through this table because, again, let's face it, if you're in GCSE Business, you can read. So hopefully, what I would recommend doing is, though, having a look at these topics and thinking, right, okay, do I understand that topic? Do I think I'd be confident answering this question? And if you're not, do a bit of research on that and maybe give it a try. So, for example, like the 2023 one about the 9 mark about reducing tax or providing free training from the government, that is quite a tricky one. Might be worth having a look at that if that's not something that you're confident with. But you can see there, these are the topics that have come up in essays, the long answer questions in previous years. In terms of calculations, I've gone for the past 5 years as well. So there is a calculation practice video that I have recorded. I am putting it up before I put this one up, so it will be on there now. I'll put a link to it in the description, and I'll put it as a link at the end of this video. So hopefully you can kind of, if you want to practice these calculations, you can go from this video to that video. But there's a whole bunch of different resources out there for calculations. So I've covered this in that video, so I'm not going to do that in any more depth here. So let's have a look at some key theme 1 terminology. Now, this is not every single key term on the course. Every single key term on the course is available in a Quizlet link, which again I'll put in the description. But what I've tried to do here is I've just tried to highlight a couple. So I'm going to go through a couple of these I'm not going to go through them all in certain amounts of depth because I know I'm going to touch on some of them at the end when we do like the common mistakes students make. But I'll mention a few of these and why I've picked these ones out. I would have a look at the whole list, see if there's anything you're not sure about, and check it out. I've gone with customer needs, not because I don't think anyone doesn't know what customer needs are, but I think students forget what the 4 customer needs that you study are. So that is our quality, choice, price, and convenience. I've put in qualitative and quantitative data just so people know the difference between the two. So quantitative is numerical data, so statistics, numbers. Qualitative is more like thoughts and opinions. I've put in monopoly and oligopoly. So, for example, a monopoly is a market where there's one dominant business with pretty much all market share, and an oligopoly is a market where there are maybe a couple of really powerful businesses that share the market between them. Net cash flow, break-even output, and margin of safety we touch on in the calculations video, so I'm not going to do those here because you can watch that video. It's marketing, guys. Business teacher, business YouTube channel. Send you to a different video. Yeah, if I couldn't do that, then I wouldn't. I mean, it makes sense, doesn't it? Limited and unlimited liability and incorporation we're going to talk about at the end. I've highlighted proximity to the market, materials, labour, and competition just because reasonably tricky subject there. It's just about where business chooses to locate their premises, whether that's a factory or whether that's a store, and whether they want to be close to the market, so close to customers, whether they want to be close to materials, so in particular if their materials perish on journey, like in a short time, so you maybe can't have your premises too far away because the materials might break or perish before they get there or not last very, very long. Could also be the case if your materials are really expensive to transport, so maybe if they're very heavy or delicate, maybe you want to be close to those materials. Do you want to be close to labour? So for example, if you are a finance company, you might want to be in London because you know that's where a lot of finance qualified workers are. Or do you want to be close to or far away from your competition? Some businesses want to be close to their competition. For example, if you're a clothes shop, you want to be nearer the clothes shops because the idea is that, someone doesn't just go shopping to one clothes shop. They're probably going to go out of one and into another. Whereas on the other hand, maybe like a post office, you probably want to be the only post office within the area because you don't go to more than one. You just go to the one. And then all that 1.5.4 section, so all of the economic section is well worth looking into. So I'd recommend having a look at that in particular. I think 1.5.4 is the hardest topic in theme 1. So have a look at those if there are any that you need a bit of help with. Use the Quizlet. Give that a try. There's a bunch of key terms resources down there for you. So let's do some exam technique recap. So first things first, what do the different assessment objectives mean? Knowledge is about making accurate points, knowing your key terms and using those key terms and your understanding of those key terms to make good points. So using key terms and concepts accurately. Application is linking your answer specifically to the businesses that are in the case study. This is only the case in sections B and C because those are the only 2 sections with case studies. Analysis is developing your point. It's not enough to just say that market research is a benefit to a business. You've got to explain why. You've got to explain what that will lead to for the business. You've got to explain, the cause and the effect and the consequences of these different kind of factors on businesses. So because leads to therefore is something we're going to refer to quite a few times in this video. It's just a chain of connectives basically. So if you need to take your sentence to the next level by next stage of development, you could use because leads to or therefore for that. And then evaluation. Evaluation means 2 things depending on which question you're doing. It could mean a balanced argument, and it can also mean reaching a judgment or a conclusion. You only have evaluation in your 9 and 12 markers, but we'll talk about a bit more of that when we get to the 9 and 12 markers. So how do you get level 3 in all of those different assessment objectives? So I've got them on this table here. The ideal is that you get level 3 in every single assessment objective. Different assessment objectives are used in different questions. We'll touch on that when we go through the structure of the different questions in a minute. But mainly what we're looking for here is for knowledge and understanding. Level 1 would be limited knowledge. Maybe you've made inaccuracies or you haven't made effective points, so it's not clear whether you've got the understanding correct. Level 2 would be mostly accurate knowledge. Level 3 would be strong knowledge shown and good use of key terminology. We want you to write like business students, not just write like teenagers. Application is about how well you use the case study. So limited use of the extract and maybe one use of the extract or a tenuous kind of link to the business in the case study would be level 1. If you've done it well but not consistently, so maybe not in every paragraph, or you've used the same piece of application twice and nothing else, that might get you potentially level 2. Level 3 is you've got to have good use of the extract, relevant quotes used in every paragraph. Now, if you're doing a 9 and 12 marker, that includes the conclusion. For analysis, it's about how well we develop our points. So we mentioned our BLTs earlier. Limited chains of analysis, so one link, for example, or an isolated point, that might get you level 1. Solid chains of analysis, so 2 to 4 links across your answer would give you level 2. And if you want strong chains of analysis, you need to have 5 links. Now, if a 6 marker, 9 marker, or 12 marker requires you to do 2 BLTs, 2 BLTs is 6 links, so that should give you a bit of a buffer into level 3. It just means that if one of your points maybe isn't as strong, you've got a bit of a safety net there. For evaluation, the question here is about whether we've got balance and whether we've got a conclusion. So level 1 might be a lack of balance and maybe a conclusion that isn't very effective. Level 2, balanced paragraphs, a conclusion with some justification. For level 3, we want balanced paragraphs. If it's a 12 marker, an alternative option suggested. And we want a conclusion with justification. So it depends on, or short-term or long-term impact. So that's what we're looking for from those different assessment objectives. So the 3 markers, there's 2 types of 3 markers. There are 6 of these. They're all in section A, so there's no case study used in any of these. There are why questions and how questions. So a why question is why something's good or bad. So explain one benefit to a business of being a private limited company. You would just explain the benefit and then you would do your kind of this is because, this leads to, therefore. How questions are different. So how questions are how a business does something. So for example, explain one way a business could extend their product life cycle. You're not explaining the benefit of extending your product life cycle. You're explaining how they could do it. So by potentially discounting the product, by launching an advertising campaign, by finding an alternative use. That is what we're looking for there. So just pay attention to the question. There's usually a couple of most of them are why questions, but there's always a couple of how questions, and it's a really easy one to get 1 out of 3 on if you just don't read the question carefully. For this, structure-wise, all we want is a 1 BLT, so you make your point, and then you do 2 links. You don't get any link marks for your original point. You get a knowledge mark for that. You get some understanding marks for your 2 links. So if you do a BLT after your point, then that would give you 3. So it just means you've got that little bit of a buffer, just in case one of them isn't so strong. 6 mark questions. We've got 2 types of these as well. Discuss questions and analyze questions. The discuss questions are knowledge and analysis, no case study. The analyze questions are analysis and application. So there's only 1 discuss question at the end of section A. You'll know it doesn't have a case study because section A doesn't have a case study. Section B, the other 2 are in section B. As you can imagine, section B has a case study, so you need to use the application in that one. The application just replaces the knowledge from the discussed questions. The structure is the same. You just need 2 BLTs. So I've already mentioned that other point there about the case studies. So you need 2 BLTs. They don't need to be positive, negative. They can be positive, positive, negative, negative. Whatever the question's asking for. If it asks for 2 disadvantages, you're going to do 2 disadvantages. There's no evaluation here, so there's no need to balance these or have positive, negative, for or against, anything like that. Here there is though. So a 9 mark question. You've got 2 of these. One is the last question in section B. The other one is in section C. You'll get given a choice of 2 options, and they will assess you on analysis, application, and evaluation. So evaluation for the first time is being assessed here. So the structure that we're looking for here is state why you've made your choice. State your choice and explain why. Then explain the disadvantage of your choice and justify why your option is the right choice. So that's your conclusion at the end. Key thing here is, for a balanced argument, which is part of our evaluation, we need a for and an against. So if we look at this example question, Frog Bikes is considering 2 options to produce more bikes, new factory in the UK, or expanding production at the existing Chinese factory. If you're choosing option 1, you shouldn't be mentioning option 2. If you do for option 1 and for option 2, you've not considered any negatives, which means you haven't evaluated. Evaluation means considering a negative. In life as in business, there are always negatives to different decisions, so you need to consider those. Now, in your conclusion, you might decide to make a bit of a comparison between the 2, but in your main body, you need to pick an option and do for and against that option. So these questions will all have case studies, so you must link it to the business in the case study. There is only 1 12-mark question. It's the last question on the paper. I think sometimes it scares people because they see 12 marks and they think, oh my god, this is worth so many marks. It's actually quite a straightforward question in terms of structure. So all 4 assessment objectives are assessed here, so we need to make sure we're using key terminology as best we can here. So the structure is do a positive and a negative, for, against, depending on what the question's like, and then your conclusion. So it's only 3 paragraphs, same amount of paragraphs as a 9 marker, but there is a little bit more that you can add in. So I've mentioned there, conclusion, is it positive or negative? Add an alternative. Only do the alternative if you've got enough time and if you've got a good point. Usually it's only students who are looking for a grade 8 or 9 who would attempt this. For example, this question here is evaluate whether crowdfunding is an effective source of finance for good and proper tea. Well, we would do the reasons why it is effective. We'd do the reasons why it isn't effective, so the positive and the negative. For the alternative, you might suggest an alternative source of finance. Sometimes those alternatives are easier to come up with than others, so don't push it if you haven't got one. You can still get really, really good marks. You can still get 10 out of 12 without one of these. It's just something that might help you get those extra couple of marks, get you into level 3 for your evaluation. So what makes a good conclusion? Make your decision clear. Use the words of the question ideally. So if it's about impact, if it's about effect or importance, try and use that word in your conclusion. Give the main reason for your decision and add an it depends on point. One tip for writing an it depends on point could be to suggest a solution to the negative argument that you provided. So if you are, I use this example all the time, if you're doing like the argument between dogs and cats, I've got a dog. He's currently out in the garden, running around, causing trouble. I love having a dog. Take him for walks. He's nice and affectionate. He's always really excited when I get home from work. But the downside was when he was a puppy, he chewed the house to bits, like chewed door frames, chewed a sofa, and cost us loads of money to kind of get those things replaced. So if I'm writing my conclusion about why I prefer dogs to cats, I would say I prefer dogs. These are my reasons why. But it depends on whether we can train the dog to not chew the whole place up. Luckily, he hasn't done it for a couple of years now because he's a bit older, but definitely a negative. So with you, it depends on point. If you can fix the negative you've suggested, that might be a really helpful way of doing it. Okay? On the 9 marker, in the main reason for your decision, at that point, you could mention the other option. I wouldn't do that in your main body, but in your conclusion, you potentially could. So if you're looking at 2 sources of finance and one of them has interest and the other one doesn't, you could say, like, main reason for your decision is that this source of finance has no interest, whereas the other option does. And obviously for a 12 marker, you could add the alternative point if you've got one. So dealing with the case studies. We've talked about application, really, really important skill. Let's go into a little bit of depth about how you can approach this. There's 2 case studies, one for section B and one for section C. In paper 1, it's likely you won't have heard of the business because it's small businesses, so you probably won't have heard of them. In paper 2, you might have heard of the businesses. We've had like KFC come up before, Sainsbury's and stuff like that. In paper 1, unless the small business they happen to choose just happens to be around the corner from where you live, you're probably not going to have heard of it, which makes it really important to read the case studies carefully. Every question in sections B and C will require application. So what I would recommend doing is reading the essay questions at least before you read the case study. And then when you're reading the case study, try and look for things you can use in each question while you're reading it the first time. If you can use different colours, even better. Though those pens, I wish I had one to show you. Could model it on the YouTube video. But those pens that have the 4 colours, they're really, really great because you can use like green for one question, blue for another question, red for another question. So if we have a look at this one as an example, this was from a section C. So we've got the 2 questions. We've got the 9 marker and we've got the 12 marker. I'm not going to read through the entire thing, but just to show you kind of like what you could do here. So for this first question, we're going to highlight this in red. The second question, we're going to highlight non-financial motivators in yellow. So Potter's Bar in Hertfordshire, that's their site of their existing shop. So when you open in the second shop, you could talk about expanding beyond just Potter's Bar. Fun fact, I did my first year, my teacher training, my first placement. The first school I ever worked in was in Potter's Bar in Hertfordshire. The second bit we could use is the high quality haircuts, because they could try and maybe offer those to different locations. Just a bit of application there. We're talking, instead of mentioning their product, we can talk about their high quality haircuts. And we could also talk about the fact that they have the branded clothing and vintage glasses frames, because that was one of the options. We've got the first option there. So depending on which option we're going with, we could potentially mention those. For the second question, which was the 12 marker, to be honest, the entire bottom section is all about non-financial motivators. The point, though, is when we come to do the 12 marker, we can just look at that part of the case study. We don't need to look at the first bit, which is quite helpful. in terms of just narrowing things down. So some final tips from me in terms of most common mistakes. So how and why 3 markers we touched on, how questions need you to explain how, don't just explain the benefit. Cash-free profit, I've touched on this a little bit in the formula calculation video. Profit is your revenue minus your total costs, whereas cash is the amount of money that you've got currently. There's a difference here. Like a business can make a profit, can have a higher revenue than their total cost, but doesn't mean they've got any cash because they might not have received the cash yet. So if they've got credit sales, for example, they might have made the sale but not have received the money yet, and so as a result they can be in a situation where they've made a profit but they haven't got the cash. And obviously not having cash is the easiest way to fail as a business because you can't afford your bills. Stakeholders and shareholders, just a common misconception students get these mixed up. Stakeholders have an interest in the business, customers, suppliers, competitors, employees. Shareholders own a part of the company. Now, obviously, our shareholders are also stakeholders, but there are other stakeholders that aren't shareholders, so just worth making sure you know the difference between those terms. A franchisee and a franchisor. So when we're thinking about franchises, I'll get out of the way now. Franchisors own the brand, so like a Burger King, Subway, etc. Franchisees are the businesses that pay to use the brand. It's a really common mistake that students make. Which one's which? Limited and unlimited liability. I touched on this in the key term section. So unincorporated businesses, like businesses that aren't legally registered as separate legal businesses, have unlimited liability. So sole traders and partnerships. That means that they, the owners, are responsible for any financial liability for the business. The liability is unlimited to just the business. It is also going to affect the individuals. Incorporated businesses, so legally registered companies with Companies House, have limited liability, so private and public limited companies. The clue there is they are limited companies, so they have limited liability. And that limited liability means that their personal assets and personal finances are protected against any potential debts. And lastly, cause versus impact. The cause is the factor that causes the effect to happen. So it's the first, factor. The impact is the effect that has happened. So the way it impacts on the business. Just making sure you know those two. So finally, Section A advice, maximize your marks. If you want to get a really good grade in this paper, you need to try and get as many marks on Section A as you possibly can. The reality is there's 18 marks available from 3 markers. It's much easier to get 18 out of 18 on the 3 markers than it is to get 18 out of 18 on the 2 9 markers. It's really hard to get 9 out of 9, but you can get 3 out of 3 quite easily. So try and maximize your marks. I would say students should be trying to aim for 28 plus out of 35 on that section. It's going to be harder to get that level of percentage marks on the other sections. So really important you maximize Section A. Go quicker than 1 mark a minute and make sure you have enough links in your 3 markers. Sometimes students just get into the habit of just writing 1 link. It's just a really easy way to lose a mark. It's not that difficult to just do 2 links in there. Use your BLT, gets you 3, so then you've got a bit of space. For B and C, the advice is pretty much the same really. Use the case study. Make sure you use the case study. Really, really important skill. Make sure you don't go over time on your long answer questions. So think when you're doing your 9 markers, right, I want to be spending no more than 10 minutes on this. Same for your 6 markers. And then lastly, your 6 markers don't need to be positive and negative. Your 9 and 12 markers do. They need balance. They also need conclusions. Okay? If you've got any questions about any particular topics from paper 1, put them in the comments. There's a whole bunch of resources I'll link in the description. Hopefully it'll all go really, really well. I'm sure it will. If you've got any questions, as I said, please let me know and I'll do whatever I can to help. Thank you very much.